Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, and I'm going to offend anyone in here who speaks Spanish, but I'll do my best. So our speaker tonight is Elena Tudela Rivadeneira. She holds a degree in architecture from the Facultad de Arquitectura UNAM. And UNAM, by the way, I got to visit it last year, and I was just looking up today. It's such a fascinating name for university. It translated in English to the Autonomous National University. So there's a lot of politics to the naming of that place, which is fascinating. She has a master's degree in architecture in urban design from the GSD at Harvard. She is a PhD candidate in architecture at UNAM. Elena coordinated the urban design of Hydric Park Quebradora in Iztapalapa, Mexico City, which received the 2017 Regional Gold Award and the 2018 Global Gold from Lafarge Holcim Sustainable Awards. She's an associate professor at the School of Architecture at UNAM and co-founder of the Office of Urban Resilience, ORU, which was recently awarded an Emerging Voice recognition from the Architectural League of New York in 2023. She co-curated Mexico's National Pavilion, Displacements, at the 17th Architecture International Exhibition, the Venice Biennale, in 2021. She is a member of the Advisory Council for Public Space and the Resilience Council of Mexico City, and is part of the National System of Art Creators for Mexico's Ministry of Culture. So please welcome Elena to the podium.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your kind invitation to talk about my work in this amazing school, which I've just known for a day, but I'm pretty impressed with the conversation I had earlier on with students and with some faculty, so thank you so much for inviting me. I'll be presenting work I've developed from my design practice at ORU, where I'm a co-founder along with Adriana Chavez, Victor Rico, and Memo Chavez. Some of the projects I'll be presenting also come from my role as professor at UNAM. And so I usually try to bridge the work done in both the professional and the academic realms intentionally, so as to explore a more integrative design practice of research and design as research. At UNAM, I coordinate a seminar called Interstices, where we explore the intersection between the urban and the ecological, as well as the overlaps between landscape architecture, urbanism, and urban design and architecture. And ORU is a design practice which tries to have a critical lens towards resilience, advocating for scaled-up design thinking to foster new futures of interconnected urban regions, strengthened ecological structures, and empowered communities. We started in Mexico City, that's where the four of us are from. And from the onset of our practice, we realized that working in the city allowed us to test ideas on resilience and sustainability in highly complex and very dynamic conditions. As our practice main context, we realized Mexico holds significant potential as a case study for current urban problems all over the world, and as a platform for urban environmental integrated practices. So these are the contents I'll be sharing with you. Three main topics. First, the context of the crisis we're living in, then the opportunity using resilience as a framework for design, and then a couple of projects just really fast for you to see the way we've implemented these ideas in the territory. So first, I'll go over data and contextual information that I believe is very relevant to have in mind and represents to my design firm and for me the foundations of our practice. So scientific information is exactly a foundation not only for us as a practice, but for humankind. And that is particularly relevant today due to climate change and other environmental global challenges we all know about. But as designers, I think we should be very familiarized with it, and while we find our own specific ways of contributing to change, it is very difficult to grasp this information because it relates to planetary and regional scales of space and time, at least until now, that we're beginning to experience through our bodies, through our senses, more frequently and intensely the impacts of such challenges directly, whether is it through heat waves, fires, rain, or more disastrous adverse events. So these are sort of like, I'm going to go quickly through these. It's just like a frame. So these are the indirect factors that contribute to climate change. And so it has to do with production, consumption, governance, legislation, but also population patterns. And then the activities that humankind has been contributing to climate change is through agriculture, forestry, fishing, hunting, mining, and infrastructure construction. And many of these are related to our discipline, our field. And then there are direct drivers, which is change in land use coverage, overexploitation by extraction, species introduction, anthropogenic climate change, pollution, and fires. These are all drivers of environmental deterioration. And so we already know that human activity has already heated the planet way beyond what we would like. And those graphs never look good. We're starting to see some protests, more protests every day, but still little action is taking place compared to the size of the challenge. And then I also usually go to the IPCC to understand or to better grasp the magnitude of these changes that we're going through. And this is all part of the 6th assessment report, the first one, the physical science basis. And you can see that we're talking about at least 1,000 years changes that we're introducing into our environment. And so that's the amount of CO2 that must be eliminated from the atmosphere by the end of the century, which is equivalent to all of the carbon dioxide emitted by US, China, Germany, and UK since the Industrial Revolution. Sounds difficult, but it's not impossible. And these are not my words. These are Johan Rockström's words, who's the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, but also participates in the Stockholm Resilience Center. And so at this COP26, he argued that in the list of tasks to fulfill the Paris Agreement, giving up fossil fuels is the easiest one. The most difficult part is restructuring the economy, changing consumption habits, defending ecosystems, fairly distributing the remaining space in the planetary boundaries, etc. So changing people's minds. And that is something I believe architecture can do a lot to contribute. So science, the basis of our culture, as I already said, our fundamental heritage is the object today of marginalization and socio-political antagonism, which is pretty critical. So I think there's a rift, there's a problem in which this scientific basis has not been effectively communicated and explained to a general public. And so that's also an opportunity for designers to help do that. And then if you start going deeper into it to understand what it means, the higher the accumulation of emissions, the greater the proportion that will remain in the atmosphere. So our capacity to make use of our natural resources of our planet without, the human anthropogenic action is being reduced as we move along and further along in these scenarios. So we know the world is not on track, that's for sure. I don't think no one can actually be against that now. Interconnected climatic planetary challenges are happening. So there's hurricanes, heat. As I said, the pandemic is also a part of understanding the zoonotic relationships between men and other species. Sea level, sea rise, oil extraction, fossil fuel, coral bleaching, overfishing, floods, climate refugees, etc., wildfires. This is an image of a week ago, Acapulco, Guerrero in Mexico. This is a Category 5 Otis hurricane took place and damaged the whole city. It's a 2 million city, and this is what it left behind. And so it's catastrophic. Acapulco is a recreational beach site for a very long time, perhaps one of the first ones in Mexico. And now, stores are being looted. There's no water. There's no food. Material assets are mostly damaged. No gasoline left. No public transportation. No banks. No airport. No roads, they're blocked. total collapse in the worst tragedy for the region and perhaps the worst of its type in our country. This just happened last week. And I would like to share with you these two sources of information that I frequently go to, these type of sources. So the one to the left gathers like Climate Change 2023 Synthesis Report of the IPCC, which I already mentioned a little bit before, gathers information and data being produced, but does not conduct its own research. It does bring together around 3,000 specialists writing and reviewing it from a lot of countries all over the world, producing analytical documents, but not prescriptive ones. And so in this 6th edition of the Synthesis Report, which just came out this year, and the first of these reports goes back to 1990, we're sharing some very relevant information that I'll go deeper into it in a little second. And the one to your right is it's a journal's article from scientists, actually the scientists that first used the term climate crisis or coined it. And it was published a week ago with some very disturbing news. The work of these scientists, among them William J. Ripple and Christopher Wolfe, is new data being produced and analyzed by them, and it's the sort of research that actually fits into the IPCC reports. It starts with life on planet Earth is at siege. And then it goes on, like in the next paragraph, we are venturing into uncharted climate territory. So what they do is do an annual report of a set of vital signs of the planet and the potential drivers of climate change, revealing deeply concerning trends and patterns of climate-related disasters for only this year. And what's there, and I do ask of you to take a look at it. It's obviously, it's open, so it's for you to, it's free. Things are turning bad faster than it was expected. And that's pretty worrisome. These are some of the findings of the IPCC synthesis report, which are just like mentioning what probably we already know, but they're like going deeper into understanding, for instance, how likely it is that these events will happen. And then they had to go to the extent of showing how future generations will experience this so that people can start to relate to it directly. So if you're born in 1950, this is what you're getting. And if you're born 2020, this is what you'll be seeing and who's going to experience this change. This graphic, I'm sure, will be changed and transformed towards a worse scenario once they input the results of these types of the other report that I was telling you, the article on Bioscience, the journal. And these are some of the findings of that article. So you see the vital signs that they measure is Antarctic sea ice extent. And so the red lines are those representing 2023, this year. And there's this one down there. I'm not sure you can see yeah. This is Canada's cumulative area burned in your territory, 1 million hectares. And this is what's going on. But then every single chart that you see, the global sea ice extent is obviously way, beneath the norm. And this is just for this year. So this is what's happening. This is what we're doing. And then, of course, they try to portray it in a very scientific way, like untold human suffering in pictures. And of course, we see it every day in the newspapers, and it's just become the new normal. We're sort of like detaching ourselves from all of these events when we should be, in fact, trying to figure out how to help these scientists and any other scientists to portray this information and actually bring about change. These are the planetary limits, also showing some worrisome ideas. The Stockholm Resilience Center measures this. It's a lot of the work of Johan Rockström. So you see 2009, 3 of the boundaries were crossed. 2015, 4 boundaries were crossed out of 9. And so 2023, where 6 boundaries are crossed beyond the limits of, not knowing. That's why they say this is an uncharted territory, because there's no way, there's so tipping points. We can't go back. And the further we move away from those tipping points towards more dramatic scenarios, the worse we'll do. Then we see also the disproportionate impact. As everything in this planet, it's unequal. So those who contribute the least greenhouse gases will be most impacted by climate change. And so here you see map reveals stark divide in who caused climate change and who's being hit. And if we go closer to Latin America, which is where I'm from, is one of the most affected regions by climate change related to poverty and inequality. So this is where we'll be having more heat waves, decreased in crop yields, wildfires, coral reef repletion, and extreme sea level events are projected to be every day more intense. Just in Mexico, 37% of Mexico's population lives in the coastline. 38.5% of the population lives in poverty. And so in blue, you can see all of the coast that will be for sure be under risk of floods. On the other hand, Mexico's geological, geographical, and topographical condition positions it as one of the world's mega diverse countries, holding, I think almost only China is close to it. It holds, all of these territory in red holds almost 70% of the biodiversity of the world. And so also, on the other hand, you can see that Mexico holds a lot of it, as well as Brazil and certain parts of Asia. We're also one of 8 Vavilov centers, which are centers of origin of cultivated plants where domestication started, also considered centers of diversity, which also translates into a multicultural and multilingual rich territory. So working in Mexico has allowed us to bridge design with global challenges such as these, like climate change, but also biodiversity loss, water management, and land use changes. So we ask ourselves, what's the agency of design in this 21st century with all of these in mind, with this context? And we believe it's time for designers to address pressing challenges instead of avoiding them or relating to them from a very personal and individual way. As the need to integrate the environmental with the cultural has become more and more evident, problems have arisen, such as those derived from greenwashing, not only in communications and marketing strategies, but also present in architecture and design. I believe we must move away from good intentions and branding to engage in a more politically conscious direction that incorporates technical with cultural values. This is a quote from Henry Lefebvre: "At the point we have arrived, there is an urgent need to change intellectual approaches and tools." So on the one hand, architecture materializes our social practices, relationships, and values. And on the other hand, the arrangement of space defines us in turn. We wonder, how can architects endow people with a direct agency in the production of space, leaving aside the needs of the market? What does it mean that the practice of architecture ceases to focus on final products to design processes of co-production and self-management? What is the aesthetic proposal of this way of thinking space? But also, how is it defined if it is no longer in the singular? The ownership of the planet's land is in a few hands and tends to be a monopolistic condition. Precarious tenants or small mortgaged owners, and there obviously is an evident and unsustainable gender inequality everywhere. Many places experience a culture of fear and insecurity today. So how can a new ethic for architecture in favor of the environment, equality, and freedom be proposed? These are the types of questions underlying most of our work. And this is a quote from Ashish Kotari in Pluriverse, a post-development dictionary, that says, "Given the diversity of imaginative visions across the globe, the question of how to build synergies among these remains open. There will be setbacks, strategies will fade along the way, and others will emerge. Differences, tensions, even contradictions will exist, but this can become a basis for constructive exchange. The ways towards a pluriverse are multiple, open, and in continuous evolution." So now I'd like to talk about the opportunity, enough about the apocalyptic visions. So we believe it is no time for despair, as I said, and as Donna Haraway would put it, we need to stay with the trouble and not allow the game over mentality to bring us to paralysis when there is so much to be done in a very time-sensitive manner. And technology is a means, but will not be rescuing us on its own. There are many opportunities to get down to work within our profession, and not only by sparing plastic bags in the supermarket. So resilience as a framework. For us, resilience is about adapting and reducing vulnerability. It is a capacity of any system to deal with external changes whilst maintaining its structure, functions, and identity. And this definition was coined by the Canadian ecologist C.S. Holling, who also designed the diagram that you can see down here on the bottom to the right. So these are some of the ideas that I'm learning from an ecological perspective and writings that I think can translate into our work as designers. So first, the fact that it is impossible to eliminate risk. There will always be residual risk. And that also goes to, we need to aim to fail in the best possible way, going from a fail-safe perspective or approach towards a safe-to-fail one. We also should seek not just adaptation, but learning and emerge stronger, which it's different from the engineering perspective. Seek risks minimization through no regrets measures. And I found really few bibliography and conversations around what that means for design, but I think the design of no regret measures is something that we should be taking a serious look at. We should be proactive, accept uncertainty, which is also something we're not used to doing because architecture has always been a very control freak discipline, but also work collectively. Systems must change to recover equilibrium or functions, so we have to accommodate change. That's what the diagram is showing us as well, that every system goes through different phases and resilience varies at different points in order to sustain that structure. The redundancy principle, which is not organized around efficiency, also something very related to architecture, and cross-scaling are vehicles for translating systems thinking into cities and societies. So there's a distinction between bouncing back and retaining the ability to get back. And I think that's a crucial thing to have in mind. So systems must change to recover their functions. And as designers and planners, we don't like change that much. Furthermore, simply trying to make systems more robust to changes may lead unsustainable systems to resist over time. We need to transcend the buzzword and the greenwashing. And so that's why for us it's so relevant to understand resilience through a systemic thinking vision, which grants the term of resilience the relevance for a debate on the city and helps overcome urban planning's shortcomings. However, there is little understanding of systemic thinking in the political and governance processes, that what we know about resilience in urban systems is fragmented in topics or in the analysis of the evolution of urban pasts only. This is the way we can understand systemic thinking when facing complex systems as the ones that involve the urban and the environmental, and they're characterized by the confluence of multiple processes whose interrelationships constitute the structure of a system that functions as an organized whole. So a system is a conceptual construction. They do not exist. We design them, made by the researcher, the observer, the student, the designer, with which he represents what he considers to be the most significant activities and factors that are identified or inferred from reality for a given purpose. Therefore, any project requires understanding what is its system. And then we have these issues of the rifts that we've built around what's social and what's natural that are not being productive today, or understanding a very unique, or I would say not understanding the differences between nature when it's a hurricane, for instance, or when we're planning it and making it operate within our own rules. We know there's this divide between nature and culture, and there's a lot of interdependencies that we need to make visible. Usually people know more brands and logos than birds or tree species. So for us, all of these transformative projects that need to happen are processes, not objects. And here are a set of areas that we work with. For instance, shared visions and preliminary studies, that's something that sometimes we've been asked to work with, like resilience analysis or mapping, or building shared visions with communities. Then there's the urban strategy and schematic design, where you have the maintenance and financial plans, or public participation and engagement, or the conceptual design itself. Then there's the design, development, and construction documents process, which we're all trained in when we study architecture. And finally, there's implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, which also goes back to learning and going back with those findings. It's inevitable to think about an uncollaborative, we need to start thinking everything in terms of collaborative approaches, not only with people, but also adopting this lens of open processes for design itself among other artists, other designers, and other professionists, which leads to interdisciplinary activity. So for us, risk and resilience have become the backbone of our practice and the focus of most of my research. As the name of our office suggests, we're using resilience as a guiding principle for design, and it has been a consistent thread throughout our practice. Adopting this lens has profoundly influenced our approach to projects, prompting us to reflect on our role as designers of the urban environment and the impact our work can have in shaping the future. In a way, it requires accepting uncertainty, yielding control, integrating design with non-design, and being open to multiple desirable scenarios and not just one. It demands a keen sense of observation, recognizing that architecture is co-produced, and that in this way, we can better decide where and when to design or to withdraw. So, along those lines, I believe something that we need to practice as a muscle is our observation capacity. And there's this quote from Aldo Rossi that I really enjoy that says, "Perhaps the observation of things has remained my most important formal education, for observation later becomes transformed into memory. Now I seem to see all the things I have observed arranged like tools in a neat row. They are aligned as in a botanical chart or a catalog or a dictionary. But this catalog, lying somewhere between imagination and memory, it's not neutral. It always reappears in several objects and constitutes their deformation and in some way their evolution. So getting to know the way we observe and improving that observation makes a lot of sense." These are also, going deeper into observation practices, we realize everyone designs, whether they have a title or not of architecture. And so there's a lot to be learned just from observing the world and discovering architecture and not just creating it. This is a project I've been working on for the Mexico's national art creators system that's called Risk Atlas for Urban Architecture in Mexico. You can go into that website and find out more. It's all in Spanish, unfortunately, but I'll be translating it sometime soon. And so it sort of like goes deeper into how architecture can understand uncertainty, plurality, serendipity, and certain terms that I believe should be in our map, and sort of like tries to expand the boundaries of what architecture is. And I think that's crucial to actually avoid the risks that our profession is facing today. This approach also requires a spatially and temporally multi-scalar approach, which has brought us closer to mapping tools and visualization resources, as you probably all are engaged in already. Since resilience is a capacity, neither good or bad in itself, it requires clarity of objectives and whom we build resilience for. We seek resilience, particularly for the most vulnerable human and non-human collectivities, and that involves coordination and mediation between distinct needs, aspirations, and visions that are usually not in the maps. This is part of where we started our research in Mexico City, that it's one of the regions that has been most drastically transformed in the world. So that's how it looked back when the Spaniards came in, and this is what it looks today. We dried up a lake entirely, a very dynamic and complex ecosystem that today it is what it is, and if you've been there, you probably won't see anything left of the lake except beneath your feet. But the future, if we were able to do that transformation, then we're also able to think of the future in a different way. We're able of great transformations. Let's just orient them the right way. And I'll go, before I finish, over certain projects. This is it's a research project and a publication that we did for the Secretariat of Integrated Risk Management and Civil Protection in 2021. It's also, you can take a look at it online. It's called Resilient Mexico City, Perspective and Projection of an Invulnerable City. This is what it looks like. And so what we did was analyze the city to have a better understanding of the urban risk conditions it faces and how to better address and mitigate them. So this project started because of the earthquake that affected a large part of Mexican territory on September 19, 2017. And this highlighted the need for planning from a systemic and resilience building perspective and not only from a reactive position. So the representation of Mexico City as this dynamic, adaptive, heterogeneous, and complex socio-environmental system was inevitable. And we also went to understand the areas of environmental value and what are the most urgent tasks to protect them, because all of the region depends on them. So recent crises and disasters, not only the earthquake we are facing in Mexico City, make visible the problems of urban environmental integration, management, and planning. And also the lack of consideration of these vulnerable zones, mostly illegal settlements, and the peripheries, is taking a toll on the city. And that is part of what this document intends to contribute. So I'll just walk you through some of the images that we produced. We paired, this is just the main analysis of socioeconomical aspects, environmental risks, and urban. This is the way it used to look like so that we can see it today. We wish we could actually have markers for this in the city so people could identify what it looked like, because this lake reappears when it's rainy season, only with sewage this time. And so we paired in this looking back at history, land tenure, infrastructure, urban fabric, and then floods and earthquakes that took place. Those are the two main risks that the city undergoes. And so we did a map and we researched all of the information to construct a timeline of these processes. And then we came up with this narrative that explains the constructed risk of Mexico City and how we've been building up this risk as we move along. And these are the reasons that we've been doing it for all of these years. We did this timeline specifically for floods. It's a city that has been flooded for a long while, sometimes like for years. And these are the consequences that we had to measure in terms of money, in terms of people, in terms of assets. So what are we spending on these type of risks so that we can understand what could we be contributing to if we do things differently. Then I would like to talk about a project that is one of the projects we're most fond of, Hydric Districts. It's an alternative, medium-scale urban model for sustainable water management. It won the World Landscape Architecture Award of Excellence in the category of Concept Analysis and Planning. And it was funded in part by Mexico Innovation Fund's grants by Harvard David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies. It was done through several universities, a water fund. Anita Berrizbeitia from the GSD Harvard University also collaborated, and Arsos Arquitectos. So the current water management model is no longer sufficient to provide the most basic water services for our city, to serve for the much needed urban retrofits that aim to densify well-connected areas of the city. The approach to the water crisis has been either at the monumental scale of gray infrastructure or the scale of very small, uncoordinated, piecemeal green infrastructure projects. That is good that they're there, but they're not connected, and people are not aware that they're infrastructural. This research gave us a unique window of opportunity to explore the potential of designing at this scale, like a district scale, through a framework that could produce a new urban model for sustainable water management in our city. Unlike large-scale green infrastructure or small green infrastructure projects, this project proposes an alternative to address the water crisis in Mexico City, suggesting that rain, gray, and sewage waters are extremely valuable resources, not waste. So this research envisions the urban retrofitting of the historic district, specifically of Tacubaya, through this model, which prioritizes water reuse, retention, treatment, and infiltration, while enhancing a system of open and historical spaces with water infrastructural functions. So implementing the first medium-scale hydric district in Mexico City is technically, financially, and politically feasible because there is a political will to apply a medium-scale urban planning instrument to redevelop and densify historic neighborhoods. Also because local authorities are willing to deploy a series of public projects in any of these areas, but need an integrative framework. And also because these areas are strategic, connected to the city center, and ideal for testing new schemes for water governance. So by design, hydric districts can increase space to reintroduce water on the urban surface and reuse water, creating an alternative solution to our crisis while improving quality of life and urban biodiversity. So this is an excellent example of our collaborative work and a project, as I said, we're very fond of. It is an applied research project developed through 3 different contracts and 1 research grant. And so it represents an urban territorial planning tool that places the idea of water as a resource at the center of urban development and public space creation, contributing to urban resilience by facing the current water crisis. Hydric districts operate at the intermediate scale as a base unit for the systemic and integral operation and implementation of interventions in any given neighborhood. Its structure is based on a shared vision that pursues local, participatory, decentralized, sustainable, and circular economy management in a specific district composed of neighborhoods or blocks that share certain identity features. And it operates within the premise that every drop of water that precipitates in a place stays in it, so it can be retained, infiltrated to the ground, evaporated, used or reused in different ways, and being drained to the sewage only as the very last option. So beyond the production of knowledge and strategies, we believe design can also produce collective narratives to promote inclusivity, broaden empathy, and challenge systemic biases. So we did for this project a series of workshops we coordinated to create or co-create this model with different stakeholders, including neighbors of this area. So this collaborative storytelling allows for a better understanding of our shared human experience and creates more authentic and representative narratives. It enables us to steer away from the anthropocentric approach in the design disciplines and include non-human entities such as water, ecosystems, and other agents of the living world. It also can be replicated in different areas of the city as long as public and private promoters are interested in carrying it out. And it is an experiment not only on collective engagement between stakeholders, but physically between projects and buildings within the district that require shared infrastructures to meet the supply and demand of different types of water qualities, such as stormwater, gray water, and sewage. 70% of the water we dispose of from housing is gray water, but we're mixing it with sewage immediately. We're close to finishing a publication on this, but we're late on it. So this is what the present looks like with this monumental centralized gray infrastructure that is never enough for these super large megalopolis. And we believe that hydric districts can contribute as an alternative model of many others that have to be designed of decentralized urban water management that also links to biodiversity, to ecosystemic services, and to community engagement and empowerment. So this is a way we believe we can change that city from what it is to what it should be. This project, moving through scale. This is a medium-sized project. It's a public infrastructure proposal, 8 projects that were done for the Urban Improvement Program in Mexico from 2019 to 2020. First in Los Cabos and then in Tultitlán, State of Mexico, near Mexico City. This was nominated for the Mia's Crown Hall Americas Prize, and it got an honorable mention at the 5th Latin American Biennale of Landscape Architecture, and the team was very large that we worked in. These projects were done in less than 3 or 4 months, up to construction documents, and were built between 4 and 6 months. So it represented a huge challenge. These first 2 public infrastructure projects belonging to this program were in Los Cabos. And this is Baja California Sur, which is the most arid state in Mexico with the highest number of direct impacts from hurricanes and tropical storms. The city of Los Cabos is the most exposed to such impacts, leading to severe river and coastal flooding, as well as droughts that risk water availability. Los Cabos has very few green areas and a significant deficit of public recreational space outside of touristic areas. Shade Garden, which is the name of the first one, seeks to improve microclimate. Well, both of them do. They have the same platform. Promote a local cultural and environmental identity, and mitigate vulnerability to disasters, becoming also spaces for refuge. It is a water infrastructure and landscape project that slows down, infiltrates, and channels runoff water. Both of them do it differently. And then, well, what you can see is a sports center, and it's an open public space. Here's the plan. Here's the section. It includes a professional sports court, a covered open space, which is the diagram, the section that you're looking at, with a court, bleachers, restrooms, and a cistern, a water cistern, a space for calisthenics with a jogging track, a space with playground equipment for children, a children's playground, and the shade garden recovers and introduces native and xerophytic vegetation, which contributes to shelter from the sun during the day, but also have a very low water consumption in irrigation and low maintenance. If you think about these municipalities, you know, having these new projects and having no money to maintain them, you need to think about that as well. So the open plan covered space has a saw-shaped roof oriented to limit direct solar incidence by encouraging the installation of solar panels on the exposed surface, homogeneously illuminate with natural light from the north during the day, but also conduct south winds from cyclones outside of public space, but admits north winds to improve microclimatic comfort, reduce thermal gains to the interior, and eliminate energy consumption by any type of active conditioning. The project materials are of fast construction and high durability, low maintenance as we could thought of, and have all like very apparent finishes for that same reason. These are the restrooms, and this is the interior of it. We really like the fact that we left it open because we think that promoted people to talk amongst themselves, and that's something very relevant to resilience. If you close a space, someone has the key, and someone has the power to open it up or to share it in different ways. If you keep it open, people have to talk between themselves to arrange the program. And then, of course, these murals happened like a year after the construction. We were very happy because that's exactly the success of the project. People are actually enjoying the space and doing these murals with it, and this is a very proud muralist of this space. The other one is a water garden, which is very close by. Both of them are. This is a civic space, the same type of building, since we had to do it really fast. It doesn't have a court, it's just like a civic space. This is what it looked like before, so it was sort of like it's a river that's dry during dry season, very insecure. This was like noon, and I was really panicking. This is what it looks like from above, and as you can see, when water pours, it takes everything with it. So this intermittent runoff has to be an input to the project. And so what we did is to produce a space that could operate differently or differentiated in a differentiated way when it rains, so that water is channeled through this infrastructure and then infiltered or retained or slowed down in these rain gardens before it floods downstream. I always like to put the renderings just because this is what you believe it will be like before actually being built, and then comparing it with what gets built. And I mean, it's an interesting idea because it's not always, it's almost never like it, like it is rendered. And this is what it looked like. This is the color of the stone that's right there, and that's very beautiful, which we didn't think it was like that. It looked like very gray, and it was surprising to find that stone there. This is a structure. There's a court. And then this is the infrastructure for the water. These are it's very dark in all of these areas. There's no street, there's no pavement, there's no sidewalks, there's no lighting. So these become sort of like the beacons of these communities of very marginalized areas. And then to show this vegetation, because they're used to think that the palm trees that they're planting in the touristic area are from there, which are not. So this is the very beautiful desertic vegetation they have, and we thought it's very relevant for them to identify it. And then there's this project that we did. It's 5 projects actually for Tultitlan in state of Mexico along the same lines, like you need to do it fast and cheap, and you have almost no control over supervision of the construction site. So it's just like, give it its blessing and let's hope that things go well. This is a market that we redid. This is again all of the renderings that we did for a market, a plaza, a library, a cultural center, fire station, park and sports, a park and sports park, well, sports park, I would say. And so all of these had to be done in 5 months with construction documents. This is how we envisioned it. Each one had a color code, but we had to do like a design that applied for every site. This has all the colors, the coding colors. So still, there's still fabrics right next to this place, and that's why we went along with this idea of the material selection. These are very insecure areas as well, marginalized, but mostly insecure. And so that's why we left it super open, having a corridor that has different alternatives and points of view where you can be seen. And these are the buildings of one of the cultural center. This is a fire station, and how we proposed the fire workers to open it up for the population which used to visit this site. They used to play basketball in this place, and so we helped make a bridge between the community and the fire and the fire workers to allow them to play in this newly. It wasn't the same, but we redid a court, and so they offer it sometimes to the community so that they can play there. And this is a construction work. Should be finishing like next month, if not this one, if it's not already finished. And this is the last of them. Also a cultural center. And that's about it. 2 more projects really quickly. This is a very small project. This is a pavilion we designed for the Venice Biennale in 2021. We were co-curators, but we also were content editors and designers of the pavilion, so we basically did everything. I did this along with Mauricio Rocha and Isadora Hastings, we got all selected to be co-curators of this pavilion. And so in the current context, with multiple realities in conflict and the standstill forced by the pandemic, Mexico's pavilion sought to reflect on displacements, understood in terms of social and natural systems, inequality, environmental degradation, risk of disasters and violence. We framed contemporary architectural practices as complex networks of various displacement factors, which have historically shaped our territory and the architect as a mediator of such displacements. The pavilion focuses on the implications of design on displacements at different scales of time and space, whether these are promoted, desired, harnessed, or avoided to foster more equitable, fair, and sustainable environments. So I mean, architecture rarely considers the direct or indirect effects or externalities it has on the generation of conditions that lead to displacement. It is centered much more on end products than processes in dialogue with subjects, objects, and systems that are constantly moving in different temporalities. So by generating awareness of these consequences, architecture can establish a better relationship with its context and contribute to strengthening a sense of community, empathy, restitution, and recognition of the most vulnerable social ecosystems. The pavilion sought to promote architects' ability to recognize, observe, and analyze the different forces that drive displacements. These transcend borders and boundaries, and in their passage through different geographies, draw pauses, thresholds, and changes of course. Addressing these conditions can help build more equitable, autonomous, and desirable scenarios for the plurality of subjects and ecosystems involved. So, the design of the pavilion was based on a collective creative process as a laboratory of ideas led by our curatorial committee and developed in conjunction with a selection of 12 participants. It was constituted as a critical exercise with space and material exploration defined by the dialogue between the curators and the participants, thus eluding authorship. And so here you can see the design generated, in this diagram, a spatial sequence that had pauses to explore sensory registers through architectural conditions associated with different forms of displacement. And the museographic content consisted of audio and video projections that responded to these reflections, dialogue, and exchange between curators and participants, using the selected projects as source of content. The museographic design is based on a spatial sequential experience that explores visual and auditory sensory registers, and few museographic elements were used, only a set of walls of suspended plumbed wires that do not touch the floor. These walls, on the one hand, limit the circulation of visitors and guide the trajectories through the pavilion, and on the other hand, they act at certain points as screens for the different projections and visibility of the contents. And so the contents are structured according to a collective imaginary based on the concept of displacement in the form of a glossary of terms as a reflection from the situated architectural practice that proposes possible ways of living together, which was the question that the Biennale was asking. Unlike a dictionary, a glossary compiles terms that deal with the same subject that are little known and are subject to interpretation. And so this was the case for these sorts of words like accident, kinship, pluriverse, the inexistent, ecotone, fluidity, among others. And each project that was selected of the 12 ones had one word associated to it. This is the space with the threaded walls, and these are some of the images. So in this way, we seek to build an atmosphere of reverie as a nod to Roland Barthes' provocative How to Live Together, novel simulations of some everyday spaces of, and I'm quoting, dreaming aloud an investigation. So for us, that's applying that which Roland Barthes is saying to a pavilion. And so in this way, it proposes to contemplate the architectural projection as a process that makes room for fiction as a method. And finally, very quickly, I'll show you the Great Equalizer, which was an artistic installation. We were invited by Seoul Biennale in 2019 in representation of Mexico City. We did this, it was called The Collective, and we did this in collaboration with artist Edwina Portocarrero. So we believe the thing that makes us all from Mexico City is what we feel when there's an earthquake and what we experience from that. And so what we did is a series of objects simulating a house, and through a technology that artist Edwina Portocarrero has developed, all of the furniture can become a speaker. And so the sounds associated with an earthquake are within those spaces, or these objects. That's why we called it the big equalizer. And when you sat, in this triangle of life position where you're supposed to sit so that if the building crumbles, then you have a safe space, at least until they rescue you. So it was sort of like sharing that and sharing those auditory registers with the rest of the Biennale. And so this is a quote from Henk Oving to finish off from his book, Too Big, Rebuild by Design, A Transformative Approach to Climate Change, which is this water ambassador, amazing person, that says, by design, resilience can be a powerful framework to catalyze the delivery of systemic future visions from a global perspective, inclusive cities, comprehensive planning, and sustainable climate action. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Well, gracias. Thank you very much for that talk. That was amazing. I think one of the things that I took away initially, well, what I love is the dual nature of your talk. And so I wrote down at the end that there's optimism in crisis, that the end of the work is colorful, it's invigorating, it's community focused, there's life to it. Coming from the place where you started, I thought that that is so important to the role of architects and designers in this world, because if we give up, we're all doomed. I think one thing I wanted to ask your question for you, or maybe just commentary on, I noticed in your Acapulco photo that you showed, there was so poetic to me that it was Walmart that was fallen down in the center of your image. And it had me obviously wondering about, global capital and the relationship between that. And I mean, inequality comes up over and over again in your talks. Obviously in Mexico, there's disparities there, more so than here. But now I think Canada's very quickly on a path towards greater and greater inequalities as well. And you mentioned urgency, and I'm thinking about the economics to all of this stuff, like the risk mitigation. And I wanted to just see if you wanted to comment a bit on the role that economics plays in being resilient. And like, there's one thing to be resilient against climate, which is the thing, but then there's all the other human, political, economic forces that we're trying to resist as well, that almost seem as insurmountable as the climate, because they're tied together. So I wondered if you wanted to just...
Yes, thank you. Those are great comments. I mean, I think I picked that image for some reason, and it just popped.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so many images, of all of the hotels being damaged. And I mean, they have insurance, because all of these are companies that are not from Mexico mostly. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, Walmart was all of the supermarkets were looted, even in front of the army. It's like, what can I do? Like, of course it's not right. But then again, like, what are the options? Mm-hmm. It's not easy, right? And so people don't have insurance in Mexico. No one has, like individuals or families or communities. They're not insured. So they lose absolutely everything. Right. So they were stealing like fridges and, everything. And I mean, they're facing these very dire decisions of, should I leave because I'll find food elsewhere? But if I leave, I'll get looted. I won't have anything when I come back. So it's just like those types of decisions that we also thought of when we were thinking of the big equalizer, when it's like an earthquake. What do I do with my life? Like, it's the first decision that and resilience is about that. COVID was that for the whole world. Like, you sort of like set your values straight. First comes life, then comes other stuff. But that's what resilience is about. What are the current values and how we are aware of them, first individually, but then collectively, because there's resilience in collectivity. Otherwise, it's almost impossible to recover from almost anything. And so when it comes to the political, I think it's interesting because there's different scales to the political as well. Because, for instance, Mexico sees Canada as a mining corporation. That's basically, if you've never been here, of course, and if you've never been reading about it and all of the work that you've been doing with indigenous communities and restitution and all of that, it's not happening there. We're being pretty colonial towards our own indigenous populations. You've like way ahead, I would say, of the whole world, if not certain parts of North America. I mean U.S. But that's not something we get to see from Mexico City. What we see is, these mining companies that are coming, with the resources or resource extraction activity that's happening all over Mexico and Latin America. And so there's also inequality when you talk about that scale of the planetary. Mm-hmm. So what happens there should be relevant elsewhere and vice versa. What you guys are doing here should be relevant to us because we're doing it terribly there. I mean, we complain about the way the US treats our migrants, not only ours, but every single migrants that go through Mexico, but we treat them almost as bad, if not worse, when it comes to our southern border. So if we're not aware of, that's what I meant, like externalities and where these things come from, we're just replicating that inequality that we keep complaining about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting you bring that up because I think it's one of the issues Canada has is it's got kind of two faces to itself. It likes to project itself as environmentally friendly and proactive with Indigenous peoples. But as your slide showed, in terms of our own carbon footprint and our resource extraction in our own country, we also aren't necessarily getting the full picture of all of it. And I think that I see the work that you're doing, which is very grassroots and very motivating. A lot of students and a lot of faculty are like-minded and energetic. And then there's that other side of the country that is resilient in their own way. They're resilient to our resilience somehow. So I think there's often these plays going on. I wanted to also ask you, avoiding my own pessimism about all of that, just about like your work in the Biennales. And I was noticing for the first part of your work, there were a lot of mapping exercises, and it made me think of James Corner and others who, this idea of mapping as an agency and drawing. And I think for the students' sake, just to think about some of the work that we're doing in Venice right now too is thinking about how the architect as an activist. And you mentioned numerous times this idea about changing attitudes and persuasion through, building awareness and all of these things. There's this really sad thing that when I was in Montana one year that we were talking about, they'd gone through this whole ad campaign about raising awareness about crystal meth, right? So they actually put it all over the billboards, it was all over the radio, and then they saw crystal meth go like through the roof because it was doing the opposite, right? Somehow. So the power of messaging and getting in people's faces, but using it to a positive side. I wondered if you wanted to talk about that, like the tools of the architect and how you can actually help persuade.
Of course, because they're not neutral, as you said. They're politically charged, and sometimes you don't even know. I think the same would apply like for projects to understand the externalities. Also, visualization has because it's easier to be done than to get a building built. And so there's huge risks if you don't do it at least consciously.
Yeah.
Whether that ends up happening or not, then you're able to sort of like move it around and shift, perception or change it in a way. But if you're not even aware, which is what most of the time we do, we use representation only as a means of communicating an idea, but we're not quite certain of who's communicating that idea, what that idea entails, and who's invisibilizing. So like critical cartography has to be at the center of our conversations, because I do believe there's a lot of, as you mentioned, and James Corner and all of these people that are thinking about visualization as a medium. I think we need to be aware of its power and we need to use it because it's very compelling. But not because it looks good. I mean, the aesthetic part is one of the components. That's why it's so easy on the eyes and catches attention and people are interested. But then what you say with it and who are you giving the microphone to through your drawings is something that you should definitely think about before printing anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's making me think about, there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence these days and the ability to generate imagery. And I can imagine the diagramming of that will be compelled. But when you nail a very good graphic through the critical lens that you're talking about, all the things you have to understand to translate that into something that can then be communicated. It's a very rigorous intellectual exercise, right? And knowing who your audience is and how to communicate.
Also because what we realized, I mean, this was with Anita Berrisbeitia, we were working with her, and we just realized that when you're sitting down for the Tacubaya Hydric Districts project, where you're sitting down with all of these very different stakeholders, like from government and developers and neighbors and historic, conservation people, and there's no common language.
Yeah.
There's no common interest. There's no mediation. So we realized that the best we could do was not trying to, convince anyone of anything, but it was just showing it on a paper for them to see what the other one meant.
Yeah.
And I think when it's collectively done like that, when you're giving voice to others for them to communicate and express, then there's room for mediation. Then there's more room for that. And we felt it became really powerful as a tool. Right. But it's not your words, it's not your agency.
Right.
It's trying to understand what makes sense for, and also inviting other non-human, positions like water. No one's asking that. They just want water, and there's no water. So, yeah. But how do you imprint that into that visualization, and then it exists?
Right. Yeah. Voice through drawing. I'm going to ask if anybody's got questions.
So I kind of had a question and then had questions when you were talking, and you kind of answered it. But my first question when you were presenting was that where do you get the budget? Like, who do you convince to give you the money? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, we need to build a case for it. No one's knocking on our doors like, here's your money, do something, what are you selling? It's never been like that. I don't think it has, or very few occasions. Like the best projects are about either winning a competition, which is obviously one of the most common ways of getting budget for a project, but others are like the district was about hearing the developers complain that they're not getting water on, they're not getting the water so that they can develop buildings. And so we were like, well, we can maybe help you there. They're like, okay, how? And so we have to come up with the financial structure. So we became friends with people that understand that so that we can speak the same language. Obviously, I have no training in that and absolutely no experience. But then it's like, well, then we need to understand financing and how there's a lot of green bonds currently. There's a lot of sustainable finance there, but we're not getting it as architects and designers. We're not getting that information. So it's a matter of just like knocking on doors and understanding what do we need? What needs to be done? And maybe it won't be done the first year. This has been a 7-year project. So first it's a grant, and then that has its own, shortcomings, and then another one, and then, they're asking us to do it in a different place, and it didn't happen, but now they want a part of it. And it's just like evolving all the time. And so we want to publish it because then maybe we get more ways of knocking on doors and saying, hey, this is relevant. So I think, it's like getting your hands into that area, which we don't like because we've never been trained in that, and maybe if someone is, help us. No, but it's a gray area of our profession that needs to be sharpened because there won't be any money for the things that need to be done just by standing and waiting for it to happen.
Yeah, of course. I kind of had a sense of you or your firm being like playing the role of mediator in all these, and which brings me to my next comment / question, that I think you, with this like kind of collaboration with different stakeholders, you are creating it's a consensus building, basically, like coming to that agreement and creating the knowledge as a whole, rather than you as an expert saying that, okay, this is the problem. So it's not about identifying the problem. It's about coming to the agreement that this is the problem that we have to work on. So it's basically like that common collective knowledge that you create together. And that will also go to that circle of like financial situation. Okay, where do we get the money? And then this whole idea kind of is related.
I mean, yeah,
Which is
a
very
super
valuable.
It's a super interesting question because it's a, what do I do? Like, what do I do every day, like, to get these things done? And what do any one of us do? You know, like, what do we invest our time in? And I think what we do best is build teams. So we bridge information that's lacking. So we have the best geoengineer in the city to help us. But it's not like we're asking him to calculate something, which is what they're used to. Like, what do you want me to do? Like, sit down and talk to me and talk to us. And let's figure out where's an opportunity. And then it's like, some of them are really uncomfortable with that and won't do it. And some others are like, yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious of redesigning my own discipline. Let's do this. So it's like inviting them to the kitchen. It's not like this is the baked things. It's like, what are we baking? I don't know. Like, what tastes good? Should this go with this? And in a way, I think that's what we do all day. And then when you have something that's a little bit successful, then you have credibility a little bit. And then you become a promoter. And then they're asking you for more. And then I'm no expert. I mean, that's why I asked that, like, what do I do every day? Just try to convince people, bridge people, try to understand the problem as it is, and also try to speak to each person that's relevant in a project in terms that they can understand it and that they can join. And that requires a little bit of like psychological thing that I'm not sure where I'm getting it from. But it's like psychology, right? Yeah. Like reading people. Yeah.
Having the good intention to help.
But that's just one way of doing it. I'm sure there's millions so many ways of dealing with all of these challenges. That I guess that's just the way that's in front of me.
But it's a really interesting conversation because I think that idea of collective knowledge generation is the key, right? Because you mentioned numerous times, like through your systems thinking and catalysts, right? And in essence, you're a designer that's focusing in on how do you design a catalyst with lots of different people that then can spread. Like Delanda and others will say that is the key, and that's how you actually can change. So it's moving out of that objectification of what you're doing and more like the connections and the way it can spread. Some of them die out and some of them spread like wildfire.
Exactly. And some of them are objects sometimes. And some of them are like installations because people I remember being in the Biennale, and I don't know if this is your experience, but Hashim Sarkis, who was the curator back then, asked us all, sent us an email, like through a Zoom meeting. He said, like, please make it experiential, because there's no other way of like reaching out to more people to catalyze, the question so that it gets different answers and not, or different questions and not just like what you think is the answer.
That's right.
And so to us, it was more about how you feel this. How can we, and that's also something that can be done, and it's done through materiality, through something that you can touch and feel and hear. So there's also a lot of power there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying the conversation so far, and I think, like a similar thread is sort of on my mind as well. It reminds me of, I think last year we were talking a lot about, a couple of our lectures were talking about like housing and stuff, and it reminds me of a question that we asked a couple of firms back then, which was they also have to, I guess, make an argument and find opportunities for for doing, I guess, like unique solutions for the housing problem as like you are with environmental problems and also supporting communities. And I wonder, since doing these projects that you've shown us, has this expanded your like outreach, like a network, like other people wanting to do similar things? Like, is there like I guess, like, is there a network of working on this to, like, yeah, share knowledge of like how to acquire things, and maybe municipalities seeing this being effective in the ones where it's built? Has that happened?
Yes, I think that's a very nice question to, like, to close with, because I think, yeah, municipalities' main issue is they don't have funds for almost anything. So, but that's where, like, we've been working with IDB or World Bank or GIZ, which is the German cooperation agency, and the Spanish one, and the German one, and the you know, the Deutsch one. So they have money for it. So whenever that's our like key player. Like, if you need money, you just need to convince them that there's interest and they're willing to invest in that. And then you just need to tell them, we need a project, we need an analysis here, we need a study, we need a project, and they'll chip in. And so that has grown more and more and more. We're now doing 2 resilience plans for Monterrey, which is the second largest city in Mexico City, and for Guadalajara, which is the third. And we worked on the Mexico City's one. So once you amass certain kind of, like, as I said, trustability, then these other agencies that are willing to invest on it will chip in. And so that's helping the municipalities. Municipalities are super happy of just getting whatever they can. At least that's the case in Mexico. It's like, yes, we love that idea. When do we start? It's like, can you help us find the money? Fine, we'll help you find the money. And we're always having all of this. We're working with more than, right now, like 25 municipalities. Obviously, some are super like paused because they don't have the money. So we're like, okay, but that's happening there and that's happening there. So maybe we can sort of, like, you know, make it happen. And it's always trying to find strategic ways. Also because Mexico, as well as Latin America, is under very, like, precarity conditions. Like, very, it's precarious. So there's opportunities, like, under the rocks. Doesn't mean they'll pay. But that's sort of like the way you start. So in the beginning, you sort of, like, are not earning too much. That's what we did. We had to work double. You know, I still teach. Adriana, my partner, was an IDB. Victor we're all from the government as well. We worked for the government before. So we know how governments operate and work, and we know the shortcomings, and we know what the strategies are. So that has helped us understand what they're capable of or not, and what they need. I think that's also been helpful. And having one foot in academia, to me, is very relevant, because this is where the ideas that will change things happen. They won't happen from you know, design firms. Nobody's paying for them. And they won't happen from governments or developers. So you are the seeds of those ideas. And so having one foot there, to me, is super relevant.
Thank you very much.
That was a great way to end the evening. So thank you again, Elena. It was a really great evening. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kara.